and welcome to today's webinar. I am so excited to introduce Bea Sanders. She is a compassionate and professional and deeply dedicated to helping support individuals and communities. She holds a bachelor's and a master's degree in social worker from the University of Arkansas, where her passion for making a difference really has taken root. And she has many, many years of experience, but she earned her clinical license in 2020, and she serves as a school-based therapist at a community mental health agency. And she specializes in offering individual, family, and group therapy to adolescents and using really innovative methods like EMDR and ACT and strengths-based perspectives. So today, Bea is going to share some of her insights and experiences with these unique therapeutic approaches. So we appreciate every single one of you joining us as we learn from her expertise and discover the potential impact of these methods. So Bea, thank you so much again for being here. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining me today to talk about something that is really important to me. Like she said, my name is Bea Sanders. I'm coming to you from Northwest Arkansas. I'm an LCSW. I currently work in community mental health. But I've been in a few different settings like medical clinics and outpatient settings and inpatient settings. So I have a variety of different experience where I think I've seen up close and personal, what vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout can look like. So really appreciate y'all being here with me today. So I thought we could get started with just a quick icebreaker. If you'll see, there's a chat box where you can submit some questions. So I would like to know if there was a therapy Santa Claus out there and you could ask for one thing to help with burnout or work stress, what would it be? Let's see some of your answers. Be like a 3-week vacation in the Bahamas. Pizza party. And I don't know if I'm looking at the right place, but I'm not seeing anything pop up in the chat yet. You guys tell me. A week in Alaska. Extended paid time off. No guilt time off. That's the key, right? A note writing elf. I love that. I would like one of those. Daily massages. Okay. Weekly spa days. These are all awesome things. Hopefully, I hope your workplace has given you a little something to celebrate you as the year is closing. Pay time off. Yes. Fewer meetings. I'm with you there. Real time off with no phone, no access to work. Yes, absolutely. Completely off. That's the thing, right? Aw, walking with the dog. Awesome. Wonderful. I love those answers. All right. Well, thank you so much for that. So if you guys wouldn't mind, I'd like a little bit of an idea of who I'm talking to. Would you mind just sort of dropping in the chat what kind of setting you work in, just so that as we're kind of going through this, I can help frame it along those lines. Outpatient mental health, nonprofit, private practice, work from home, domestic violence counselor, lots of hello, fellow community mental health folks. Private practice, lots of private practice. SUD treatment, we got some stuff specifically for you in this presentation. Residential rehab, nonprofit, addictions. All right, we have an awesome variety of people here. School LPC, I'm right there with you. Private. Okay, awesome. Nonprofit counselor for human trafficking. Wow, juvenile justice. Can you guys hear me okay? Trauma, suicide prevention. Awesome. All right, so we have a lot of varied settings here, so that's awesome. Thank you so much for letting me know that. So I'd like to start with two intentions. The first one is there's no shame in our game. We work with some incredibly difficult, challenging material on a daily basis. It's not for the faint of heart. Not everybody can do it, and we don't do it unless we want to be here. And we're, not robots. We're human beings. So I know there can be a lot of pressure as providers to always have things together and to never struggle. Even though we would never expect those things from our patients, we tend to hold ourselves at a much higher standard. So, I encourage you all to be vulnerable and be brave. And as we're going to learn, this is a lot more common than you may think, and just take a no shame kind of approach. Um, Brene Brown, she says shame is a feeder of disconnection, and I believe that. And so there's no wrong answers and no wrong questions. We also have people here to answer if you have anything kind of coming up through the presentation. So, and the second intention I'd like to set is just, I hope that you'll join me in framing this hour as an hour for self-care, which is exactly what you're doing. I know as providers, we always want to be learning more strategies, techniques, interventions to help our patients, but we can't do any of those things if we're not taking care of ourselves first. So I really hope you all give yourselves a pat on the back for prioritizing yourself today, and dedicating some time to look at some very real topics in our field. So let's just talk about our agenda real quick. One, we're going to talk about compassion fatigue, burnout, vicarious trauma. We're going to talk about what they are, what the differences are, what the similarities are. We're going to talk about how common it is, impacting factors, self-care on both an individual and an organizational level. And talk about just what to do when it does happen, what we can do to prevent it, what are the signs, what can we do to respond when we notice these things start to come up, so that we can get ahead of it before it snowballs. We're also going to have 10 minutes at the end of the session just for questions too. So as if you have any kind of thoughts that you want to share, I encourage you all, be vulnerable, be brave. There's no wrong answers in here, right? Again, there's no shame in our game. So let's talk about vicarious trauma. So the terms vicarious trauma, burnout, compassion fatigue, they're very frequently used interchangeably, but they're all very unique experiences, even though we can experience more than one at one time. Vicarious trauma is a psychological symptom that just occurs when we're experiencing some really difficult secondary stress from the traumatic experiences of our patients, right? So it often looks very similar to PTSD symptoms. It can happen when we're seeing a lot of patients that have some significant trauma for a prolonged amount of time, or it can happen in an instant. We can have one session or one experience that's especially disturbing or troubling to us. And rather than having the resources to be able to manage it in that moment, sometimes it can disrupt our ability to cope. And that's what we call vicarious trauma. So it can look like intrusive thoughts, nightmares, emotional numbness, avoidance, heightened anxiety or hyperarousal, disruptive belief systems, everything that you would find along with PTSD. It can look very similar to that. Compassion fatigue is essentially just having an empty empathy tank. So we hold a lot of emotional space for people, right? And our needs, their needs fluctuate throughout time. And there's very often that clinicians can find themselves in positions where they just feel like they've held so much space that they don't have any more. So they refer to this a lot as the high cost of caring. That's what we do. But, our resources are not limitless. And sometimes it becomes a little bit too challenging to absorb so much empathetically day after day after day. And so compassion fatigue can look like being really tired, having a difficult time tapping into that empathy, feeling really numb, feeling disconnected from the work that you do, from the people that you do. And so it definitely, I think, I'm in a high school working community mental health, working with lots of teachers, and the compassion fatigue is really high right now. Our kids have extra needs, we have less resources to give. And it's a really difficult time of the year, I think, for people in general, but also in terms of mental health. And so, compassion fatigue definitely is something that providers can experience a lot. And then we have burnout. Burnout is the one that you've probably heard the most about. So generally, it comes from having a lot of workplace stress, right? We know as therapists, our jobs are so much more than the hour that we sit in front of patients. It's documentation, it's treatment plans, it's contacting parents, it's making referrals, it's looking for resources. It really never ends. And a lot of times there's time pressures to get these things done in a certain amount of time. And even if you haven't personally experienced burnout, I'd be willing to bet every one of you has probably worked with someone who has. And so, we can definitely see uh, what this can look like with our coworkers, especially when we're working on teams. And it can just be very detrimental to our mental and physical health. So there's one study that shows about 21 to 67% of mental health providers are currently experiencing some high levels of burnout. There's also another study that looked at community mental health, and 54% of the participants reported emotional exhaustion, and 38% reported high depersonalization rates, even though most of them reported that they felt really satisfied with their job, that they felt fulfilled and accomplished. They were still experiencing a lot of those symptoms. So burnout's definitely something we see a lot of in the helping professions. So let's talk about what this can look like emotionally. I want to focus on this emotional response and this emotional exhaustion piece. So all three of these can have all of those factors, right? There's definitely emotional response with all three, but they can look a little bit different depending. So vicarious trauma, that can look, again, like those PTSD symptoms. And definitely we can see that sometimes there's some emotional exhaustion there. However, with vicarious trauma, especially if you're experiencing it based off of like a single experience or situation that you had, it may not necessarily bring out that emotional exhaustion piece. You may experience those emotional symptoms in certain like settings, like if you're working with that patient again or similar patients, but it can be a little bit more concentrated, if that makes sense. Compassion fatigue, that emotional piece is the primary thing that's impacted, right? It's our ability to tap into that empathy. So that can look like a lot of that emotional numbness, like I'm not feeling anything. I might not be feeling stressed, but I'm feeling desensitized to the things that I'm hearing or the things that I'm experiencing. And burnout, that emotional exhaustion is one of the primary markers. But again, like we looked at community mental health, we can experience high levels of burnout, but also feel like really, in a way, happy, fulfilled, connected with the work that we're doing. So we may not experience it quite the same way as we would with something like compassion fatigue, right? The relationship with the clients, of course, all three of these are going to affect our relationship with the clients. Again, vicarious trauma could be a more concentrated situation depending on the experience that brought those symptoms on. So it may not necessarily impact the work that you do with all of your patients, but certainly when we're not at our most resourced or we're not at our most best, that impacts things. Compassion fatigue, empathy is the bottom line of what we do, right? Most people seek therapy because they need that empathetic space. And so when that is disconnected, our patients can pick up on that, and it can absolutely affect our ability to show up and have that space for our people. And burnout, of course, can impact our relationship with clients emotionally, but also because burnout tends to lead to things like missing more work and struggling to get things in on time and falling behind on tasks, and that increase in avoidance, and all of those things impact our relationship with our clients. When we're not able to show up fully for them, we're able to see that relationship can be damaged. So different triggers that bring these on are activations. So vicarious trauma, again, can be a specific scenario. It can happen in an instant. You can have one session that's particularly disturbing and experience those symptoms. Compassion fatigue and burnout, those tend to happen over more of a prolonged period of time. Generally, when things are building and building and building, and then we sort of hit our wall. So those don't typically happen instantly, but after a period of prolonged stress. So physically, emotionally, we see these show up in all kinds of different ways. We know with mental health, it's mental health, but it presents physically, right? We can see those physical symptoms. So vicarious trauma, I think a big one with that is because of those PTSD symptoms, those nightmares, we're having lack of sleep, we're having that increased startle response. We're definitely seeing kind of physical impacts of our brain seeking those threats. Um, Compassion fatigue, it can look like a lot of sleeping. When people say like they get home and they just feel exhausted and that they could just, sleep for days. They have no energy. That's frequently what that can look like. Burnout, lots of physical symptoms there. Burnout is really in that stress realm, right? And so we see the lack of sleep, we see the irritability, the headaches, even lowered immune systems, so definitely a lot of physical impacts from that. Onset and recovery time, again, vicarious trauma can happen right away, can happen after prolonged experiences. Compassion fatigue usually happens over a period of time, but the recovery time can be short, just depending on how severe it is. Like generally we're talking about the holiday season, right? And teachers and providers feeling that fatigue and having some time to really rest and recharge and come back. One of the most frequently requested therapy Santa gifts was time off, right? That's a big one. That's really helpful when we feel like we don't have that space. Vicarious trauma, the recovery time can be very quick depending on the situation. Just like PTSD, it's treatable. When we are experiencing it with the right resources and the right supports, it can be something that we work through fairly quickly. Things like burnout can take a lot longer. Burnout generally needs a more comprehensive approach. And there are studies that show when we, continue to work in places when we're feeling burnout, it can be years for that recovery time. And so it's incredibly important that we respond to it quickly, because studies also show that that helps us be able to get over it quicker, right? When we're responding to it faster on the front end. So work satisfaction, I'd like to touch on this and some of the factors that can be impacted with that. So with vicarious trauma, some people may experience things like moral injuries, and that can change belief systems or disrupt belief systems. And so this can also fundamentally change the way we feel about the work that we do and how effective that we are and how meaningful it is, and if that has a place in this world. And so definitely that work satisfaction can be impacted. Compassion fatigue also can impact our sense of purpose with that, right? But when we're not able to connect empathetically with our people, when we're not able as easily to tap into that, we're not able to see those positive moments as much, right? Because we're feeling more cynical and things like that. And so that can absolutely affect things. Burnout affects work satisfaction 100%. Generally, there's a lot of dissatisfaction that grows especially with agencies and with organizational policies. And so that can really impact like how much a part of a team that we feel, how motivated we feel to be able to work with others on these things. So definitely we can see our impacts there. So preventative measures with vicarious trauma in particular, the best thing that we can do as far as prevention is to give clinicians the tools to know how to respond when this happens. I don't know about you all, but I never had a day in grad school when anyone set me down and said, hey, you're going to hear some really, really hard stuff, and it's going to affect you in a way that you might not be able to predict. And here's what you can do when that happens, and here's what to look out for, right? We hear a lot of things like self-care being thrown at us, but we don't necessarily get a lot of like breakdowns of what exactly that means. And especially I think when depending on that setting, if we're working in a place where a big percentage of our caseload is going to have a significant trauma history, it's wonderful for clinicians to be able to be trained in working with populations that have experienced trauma and the most effective measures, and also in conjunction on how to deal with that when that happens. I don't think I really ever studied that until I went through EMDR training. So that's a huge preventative measure. Compassion fatigue, the self-care is the biggest thing that we can see as far as evidence shows. Having frequent breaks, taking your PTO. I noticed someone said guilt-free PTO. It's hard to take off work, especially when we know there are people there waiting for us that need our help. But we can't help them if we don't help ourselves first. Can't pour from an empty cup. So compassion fatigue in particular, when we're starting to notice feeling that numbness, that disconnection, it's good to try to take those breaks when we can. Burnout, generally is oftentimes rooted in workplace stress. So the best preventative measures that we can do all revolve around setting good boundaries and managing stressors that come up with work. And I know that that's not easy, especially when you're in things like community health, right? Where there is always more to do and it always feels like too much. But being able to really monitor those workplace stressors and respond to them, get the supports that you need so that you are able to decrease the chances of experiencing them, or to make them easier to deal with when it does happen, right? So perceived purpose, talked about this a lot with that workplace satisfaction. It can impact how effective we are with our people. It can impact how effective we think therapy is in general, right? Depending on like the severity of these symptoms. And so especially when purpose is the bottom line for what we do. Nobody does this work just because they fell into it, right? Like generally we want to be here. And so that's why we're here. And when that purpose is disrupted, that can impact every part of our lives, right? So I think definitely we see this a lot in community mental health for sure. The scope of impact, mentioned this a little bit earlier. Vicarious trauma can impact generally how you feel about your work satisfaction, but it may be concentrated to something a little bit more specific, like a certain population or maybe a certain patient that you experience those symptoms with. Compassion fatigue can really impact that work satisfaction, but may not necessarily impact, emotionally how you do outside of work. It can, but not always. Burnout tends to impact us everywhere. It impacts the relationships we have with our clients, our work satisfaction, but it also impacts our personal relationships. It impacts our ability to show up for the people that we love that are in our families, in our social circles. So that impact can be really, really big. It can impact, mental, emotional, physical health. All of those things we know can be very detrimental when we're not getting the proper care that we need. So can you experience them simultaneously? Absolutely. And I think it's really important to have this conversation because we should be able to identify when this is happening, because we may need to approach those situations differently. So these conditions can exacerbate and feed off each other, right? If you can imagine going into work, already experiencing symptoms of burnout, feeling under-resourced, struggling, with your physical health, with your mental health, and then you experience an especially troubling session, you are not going to have the resources to be able to cope with that as you normally would. So you may be more likely to experience vicarious trauma. And then it could be a vicious circle where you've experienced the burnout, you've experienced the vicarious trauma, and you're even more under-resourced when you come back, which is increasing your burnout. So definitely these things can exacerbate each other too. And we can be more likely to experience them if we're experiencing one of them. So it's a very intense emotional toll when this happens. And it's really important that we're tapping into our support networks. Providers have a higher risk of developing mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, PTSD. If we're experiencing more of these at once and we don't have the proper resources or supports in place. So, how common is compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and burnout among mental health professionals? I don't think it's shocking to say very common within the helping professions, but especially within what we do. So, the APA had a study that reported 21 to 61% of mental health professionals report experiencing symptoms of burnout at some point in their careers. SAMHSA in 2012 reported that 78% of psychiatrists reported burnout. That's a huge number. I mean, that's over three-fourths, right? And so it's also pre pandemic. So we can imagine maybe what those numbers look like now. NASW reports in one study that 70% of social workers will experience compassion fatigue at some point in their careers, not surprising. And vicarious trauma, we definitely see that happening a lot, especially with providers that work with patients that are trauma survivors. So, definitely, there were some listed there in the chat, like working with human trafficking victims and substance abuse, and we see a lot of traumatic stories when we work in those populations, and so. Um, 26% of the therapists working with traumatized populations and 50% of child welfare workers reported that secondary traumatic stress. And definitely understandable. Those can be some really difficult settings to work in as far as the compassion that we have to hold and the trauma that we experience and hear about. Also, more common in high stress environments. So, this providers working in things like crisis intervention, trauma work, they're more likely to experience compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma. Years of experience is another factor. You might think that a newbie therapist would be more likely to experience these things, but actually, the research shows that the longer we're in the field, the higher our chance of developing those things happen. And so I think a lot of that is because of cumulative stress. A lot of that is just being years into the field. I've been supervising interns lately, and it's so wonderful to see just like that passion and that newness and that excitement. It's hard to hold those same feelings 8 years into the field when the newness has really worn off and we have our own life stuff that's going on, and we start to feel cynical about the systems around us. And so definitely I think it's important not to get too cocky just because we've been doing this a long time and we've heard about burnout at every annual meeting for the last so and so years, and we feel like that's not going to happen to us, but it absolutely can. So um, looked at a study of some community health directors, and it looks like two-thirds of them reported high emotional exhaustion and low personal accomplishment. Almost half reported high levels of depersonalization. I didn't include the statistic. I wish I did, but there was also another one about community mental health directors really experiencing high levels of substance abuse. And so you're also kind of considering that these are people in our leadership roles, and these are people that we're going to when we really need that support and that help. And oftentimes, they're experiencing a lot of the same things, and that can be very challenging. The influence of the caseload is huge. So the size and the complexity can definitely play a part. SAMHSA talks about a study about burnout with substance abuse counselors. That was around 33%, and opioid treatment program counselors at 65% reporting symptoms of burnout. That can be a really difficult job to do, and especially in that line of work, things can change in an instant. People can be doing really well and we think we're on the right track, and life happens and things are flipped upside down. And it's an incredibly emotional experience. So definitely it wasn't surprised to see those settings kind of carrying some of those more high numbers. So mental health professionals working with clients that have experienced trauma, of course, have a higher risk of developing it. So the Institute of Public Health talks about therapists that have caseloads where 60% or more have experienced a significant trauma history are at a higher risk of developing that secondary trauma. So I'd like to hear just yes or no in the chat box. Would you say of the patients that you work with, 60% or more have significant trauma histories. I know it's a little subjective on how we define that, but just like a yes or no, if you feel like 60% or more. 1 million yeses. I was trying to think of settings where maybe that might not be the case. If any have a no or I'm not sure, I'd like to hear what setting you might be in. And some folks too, like not to to work with that if they don't feel like they have the right training or approach. Lots of yeses, mostly yeses. Yeah. We know that trauma is everywhere, right? And so that means you have an increased chance of developing that. So it's important to pay attention to that. Community mental health, yes. Private practice, no. There was a lot of research on community mental health and how we experience more burnout, and a lot of that private practice, why that helps people is that they're able to work with those populations that feel really comfortable with them and that don't cause as much stress, and they're not doing that high crisis work all the time. And so definitely a lot of the evidence shows that that's a helpful change for a lot of people. So yeah. All right, other impacting factors. We have a greater shortage of providers. We all know that. There was a mass exodus, when the pandemic happened, of healthcare workers and helping professionals. The study also talks about rural communities, and here in Arkansas, I can tell you it's absolutely true. This study showed that 13% of rural counties had no access to psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, therapists, social workers. So the resources are really limited. And they're really limited for our people, which makes it very difficult, right? And we also have increased mental health needs. Again, I don't think I have to tell you guys this. We know ever since the pandemic, we're seeing really high rates of anxiety, depression, SI. These things are on the rise, burnout, stress. And that impacts our ability to give in the systems that we have operated in forever, that have been forever changed by the pandemic, especially. So SAMHSA went on and talked about the 5 reported organizational factors cited as the most common reasons that people are experiencing burnout in the workplace. So it talked about unfair treatment at work, unmanageable workload, lack of role clarity, lack of communication or support from leadership, and unreasonable time pressure. So feel free to sound off in the comments if any of those sound familiar, because I know that we experience this a lot, especially in our healthcare system. It can be very challenging to have those needs met in our workplace. Also, side note, in the resources below, there's a few of the toolkits that also have links for organization leadership to implement programs to help address these things. So definitely check that out. Pass that along to your directors, coworkers, or implement that yourself if you're in leadership here with us today. So let's talk about self-care and burnout management as an ethical consideration. So SAMHSA, I love this little self-care report that they made, but they just talked about like how we should consider ethically what this looks like in our practice. So the APA actually has standards written in their code of conduct. I didn't know this because I'm a social worker, but requires clinicians to take steps to stop working and to get treatment if they notice that the treatment they're giving is impacted. So that is in those ethical guidelines. NASW, they require clinicians to confront symptoms of burnout, both within themselves, but with their coworkers directly. In our code of ethics, it talks about how we need to one-on-one approach that person, say, hey, I've noticed this and this and this. Is there anything that I can do to support you? But also in 2021, they amended their code to include professional self-care as an ethical social work practice. Because if we are not taking care of ourselves, and we're not able to provide the kind of care that we want to, that's something that we need to look at through an ethical lens, right? Without shame, but it's definitely a part of our role that we're responding to this. we've got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk too. And sometimes it's about us stopping and getting that support when we need it, which I know it's not always easy in real life, but important to consider. Okay. So let's talk about prevention, treatment, and managing compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and burnout. So, what do we do about it? We know a little bit about it now. What can we do to prevent it? What can we do if it's happening? What can we do to manage it within ourselves, within our organizations? So the number one is setting boundaries. And I think I could create a whole separate training on just boundary setting for mental health providers because I think this is such a huge issue. And again, it's not like we had a class in this in grad school that told us the ins and outs of how to set these boundaries at every kind of setting that we may be in. It's something that I think we've all kind of had to learn as we go. But boundary setting is huge so that we don't overextend ourselves and so that we're able to set ourselves up for success in the future. Um, and there's in our resource guide, there's one self-care strategies for therapists that's very, very comprehensive. It's like over 50 items long, but it's so good. I really highly encourage you to check that out. When I found it, I printed it out and I put it up on my wall just as kind of a reminder that that's important. But setting boundaries with ourselves, with our organizations, with our patients, right? So, like, again, I'm in school based. I have to set boundaries with my patients all the time about the ways that they reach out to me and communicate to me and what I can do for school staff. It never ends. And when you have 35 plus patients, you have boundaries with every single one of them. So this is, I think, a huge piece in both preventing it and treating it and managing it when it does come up. Supervision and consultation, it's incredibly important to seek supervision when these things come up. Again, I think especially as new therapists, we can feel like we've got to have it all figured out and we've got to be that answer for everyone and we can't seem to know like we don't know how to handle this situation, but it's important to have a supervisor that you feel really comfortable talking to and reaching out to for help that can also give you some of that support when needed. I'll point that out. What we're going to get to the resource page, I'll know it when I see it, but I'll point that one out specifically when we get there. The boundary setting resource. And that's another reason I love working in an agency is because I work with other therapists. And I think that's huge, even if it's not supervision, even if we're just connecting for dinner after work or, you know, giving some support in the hallways between sessions. I think that's a huge piece of it. So self-care, it's not all bubble baths. It's not lighting candles. A lot of it is doing some of the really not fun things in our life that help set us up for success in the long run. And so I've got another really awesome resource about the different arenas of self-care that we're going to focus on and talk about in just a minute. But self-care is something that we should be consistently mindful of, right? It's not like we set a self-care routine and then we're set for life. Our life is going to ebb and flow, and we have to be able to look at the different elements of our life and figure out how we can move things around so that we're best supported to provide that care in the best way possible, right? So managing it. What if I'm feeling it right now? What do I do? First step, again, no shame in our game, self-compassion. I think that's the only way that we can approach these situations and actually hope for any good, healthy growth. One of the resources I listed was self-compassion.org. Kristen Neff, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with her, but she's the self-compassion queen. That website's amazing. I use it all the time for myself and for my patients. There's an awesome self-compassion self-assessment you can take, and it'll actually identify the areas that maybe you could work on or that you have strengths in when it comes to self-compassion. Lots of guided meditations rooted in self-compassion and really good resources, interventions there. So I highly encourage you to check that out. But remember, you're feeling this way because you do a lot of really hard work and you're holding space for people. And so the best thing that you can do is hold yourself lovingly as you look through these issues if you are experiencing this right now. You're not alone. Yes, Kristen Neff. Woo-woo. We love her. She's awesome. Delegate and collaborate. So it reminds me of a therapy activity I like to do where I used to keep these paper plates in my office, and we would say, "What's on your plate?" And we'd, write down all of the stressors, and we would just kind of look at them up close and think, what parts of our support network can we tap into to help with these things? Whether it's, you're having some emotional avoidance and you just need someone to body double with you, or if you need to, reach out and say, "Hey, I'm overwhelmed. Can you take some of my people from me? I think my number's getting too high." Or if you need to deprioritize some things, maybe something was really important to you at one point, but you don't have the same resources to provide to it then. It's okay if you have to change those things. Delegate, collaborate, ask for help. I know that's really, really hard to do. And especially, I think as therapists, we tend to fall into that no one can do it but me, right? Or I have to be the one, and generally we have lots of supports and resources available. Her website is on the resource list, but it's self.compassion.org if you'd like to find it independently. So definitely check that one out. Variety in work, changing things up. I remember in undergrad, like a speaker coming and saying, you should be changing your role in some way, at least, every 2 to 3 years. That can really, I think, help shake things up, give us a little bit of a revived outlook on things. Could look at if you've got a lot of challenging cases at that time, maybe delegating some of those out. So having some different variety, maybe taking on some new roles and backing out of some other ones. Now, I provide supervision at my job in addition to the therapy I give, and I love that. It's like a little break, and it's only about like 5 to 10 hours of my week, but that, I think gives me something a little bit different to do, which helps. Switching roles, placements, populations. I know in school base, like a lot of times people will switch age groups, or they'll go to different departments, or they might try a management role, or they might try a different part of the organization that they aren't as familiar with, and so that can be good. And ultimately, sometimes that management is finding an employment that is more supportive for our needs, right? Not every job is going to be the right fit for us, and we all have different needs. And I think it's important to consider those things, and that ultimately you should be in a place that feels like healthy and safe for you, right? And so definitely something to consider. So I also have this listed in our resources, and so this is where I took a lot of the information on how to manage this and how to prevent and treat it. It's an academic article called "Dear Mental Health Practitioners, Take Care of Yourself, a literature review on self-care." And what they did is they did an empirical review, took all of these different studies about therapists in particular in burnout, and just looked at what the research showed was the most helpful when it came to self-care. And so I'm going to just touch on like a small piece of it, but the whole article is so good. So I really encourage you to read it. I printed out some for my interns. I was like, this is so great. I wish I had this at the beginning of my career. But it's a really moving but evidence-based article. And so I think right here. We'll talk a little bit about those self-care domains. So the first one is awareness. It talks about different things that can help kind of increase your emotional awareness, your personal awareness of your needs. Acceptance and commitment therapy. I don't know if you guys are ACT people, but I'm all about ACT. I love ACT. Russ Harris is amazing. I really encourage you to check him out if you haven't. It's very rooted in like mindfulness and meditation, which again, the evidence shows is so helpful for mental health practitioners. So that's a really good one. One of the books that I've listed in the resource guide is specifically a mindfulness book for therapists. And so I think that's really awesome that it's so specific, because a lot of what we do is very unique, right? So mindfulness, meditation, self-reflection, creative writing, whether that's journaling, whether that's talking to your coworkers about what's happening, or exploring how you're feeling in supervision, that awareness piece is huge. Balancing, a really big one. We can't take our work home with us. We can't take our home to work with us, right? So, trying to create a good balance. I don't know about you guys, but because I am so passionate about what I do, sometimes I have a hard time taking the therapist hat off and like being a regular person out in the world. It's good for you to have non-work related hobbies. I volunteer at an animal shelter because I work with people all day long. And that's just a way that, is a fun way for me to sort of practice that self care in a way that's not continuing to use that emotion that I really need to save for work sometimes, right? But having non-work related friends, I know sometimes that can be really difficult. Therapists, we tend to group together, right? Because we're awesome. But it's, I think, really helpful to have a life outside of being a therapist and trying to create that balance and setting that time aside for yourself. If you're going home every night and doing, 2 hours, 3 hours of notes, that's all time away from yourself. So that balance is really important. Being flexible, knowing that mental health is never predictable, knowing that it's gonna look like this today, but in 3 months, it's gonna look totally different. I'm gonna have something else to stress about, but it probably won't be this. I think that's very important. So, keeping things in perspective to be flexible, having, effective ways to cope when these things do come up, being open to change, being realistic in your self-expectations. I know especially, like I work with parents and they can put all kinds of expectations on you, right? Hey, wave your wand, fix my kid, say that magic thing to make them stop doing what they're doing. But we know that that's not how this works, right? And so if, I'm not going to take responsibility for that expectation, even if it exists. And so I think that's a big important part of it too, is understanding that we're a very small piece, right? And that we're not the whole picture. Self-compassion, acceptance, setting and appraising goals, reevaluating when you need to, right? And I know too, especially as a therapist, you get in your routine of doing things, and sometimes we forget about like, I wonder how my time management is with notes. Maybe I could do this a little bit differently because I've been doing it the same way for 4 years, right? But being open to doing things differently and changing, and being flexible in what we place our energy in at that moment, right? And um, knowing that there's, always going to be something kind of different a couple steps down the road. So again, expressive writing, journaling. I love to journal. Professional development, that can be very helpful too. If we feel like more qualified and like we have the answers, we're gonna feel more resourced, right? When we're dealing with those really challenging cases. There's nothing worse in the world than like that really helpless feeling when you're like, oh, what do I do with this? This is something I've never experienced before. So, if you're working with a certain population, I think it's healthy and good and important to prioritize that development too, just so that you're always growing and growing those skills that are going to help you better manage as these things kind of come up. Number 4, physical health. I know we like always hear these things. The doctor always tells us these things, right? I think for me, it was about finding ways to be physical that I actually liked. I don't like going to the gym. That's not fun for me. For me, it's dancing around my house and cleaning. It's, for some people, it's running. Some people, it is going to the gym or lifting weights, but this is huge. I think more than we realize. And stress hormones, we release those through tears and sweat, right? And so, especially with burnout, I think that's so important. And again, it can be this very vicious cycle where we want to do those things, but we don't have the energy to do those things. And, so we get caught up in that cycle. But I think it's important to remember with self care, we're doing things in the now that help us down the road. And so, taking care of our physical health, eating lunch. I'm looking at you, therapist. Eat your lunch, take your time off and eat your lunch. Drink your water. It's good. Um, Coffee is not breakfast, but I know, it is very challenging to stay on top of those things. So being mindful of that, I think, is helpful. Having good social supports, family, friends, people in your organizations you can talk to, good supervisors, good leadership, uh, super, super important. And that spirituality piece, whatever that is for you, the work that we do is really meaningful, and we have a why of why we're here. And whatever your spirituality is, I can, guess that it's probably intertwined with that, right? And so I think we do meaningful work, but we also have to look for meaning in other areas of our life too, and that's important. That can also build in right with that social support. If you've got communities of people that are aligned with your values, it could be positive to connect with those folks more, right? Especially if you're needing that more support. So another good one to consider. All right, so we're going to get questions in just a second. I just really, there's going to be a full resource guide that you guys are going to get, but I wanted to really quickly just kind of look over these. So I've got tons of toolkits. We talked about like vicarious trauma toolkits earlier. There's some specifically for that. There's some specifically for burnout and compassion fatigue. Let me zoom this up so I can see it a little bit bigger. All right, so the first slide, these are all different kinds of toolkits. And some specifically of working with patients that have experienced trauma. We've got selfcompassion.org. TED Talk has a whole section of talks just for when you're feeling burnt out, which I thought was awesome. Fried, their burnout podcast, and I have personally listened to this, and it's really good. I would not send you guys a boring podcast, but really amazing people host that. Very real conversations and very real solutions. So I think that's good too. There's some self-tests listed as well. Burnout self-test, a free PDF checklist on some of the things that can cause burnout, and are some of those things happening in your life. Mindfulness for Therapists was the book that I mentioned earlier. There's a compassion fatigue awareness project. They have a lot of really awesome resources on their website. There's a burnout app that's supposed to be really awesome, and a self-care resource guide for therapists. And someone asked earlier about that very comprehensive guide. That's this one here, the Psychotherapist Self-Care Checklist. It is so good. I really wish, I would have had that starting out. It's got some really good strategies in it. And a 30-day challenge for physical health stuff. If you're someone that maybe does a little bit better having some structure, maybe you could implement this in your workplace if you'd like. And we also have 2 different libraries too of just different online resources and articles that you can read more on with that. And so I hope that you guys find some of those things helpful. But how about questions? I know that was a lot of material. We've got about 10 minutes left, I think. How I've learned how to just stop. That's a good one. Sorry, I think I was a little late to see that. But any kind of questions, thoughts that come up for you as we go through this training? Anything kind of stand out to you? Questions that you might have? Or just thoughts that you want to share?
B, I saw that someone put in the chat, what was the resource with 50 ways to establish boundaries? Is that on the resources guide, or is there some other link that they need?
Yes, I think 50 is actually in the article, but the very comprehensive guide that I pointed out, this it looks like number 5, the Psychotherapist Self-Care Checklist. This is a very comprehensive guide to self-care for therapists that includes every area of work-life balance. That is the one that I was referencing. I think there's even more than 50 on there. But
Perfect. Thank you.
yes, I hope that you find them helpful. I think in my looking at all the resources, I found some good ones for like everyday folk. But we really deal with some very specific things, and so I'm hoping that all of these are very tailored to you as providers, and that's going to be helpful.
Thank you so much, Bea. And I really appreciate what you've gone over today. And I know that this is going to be so helpful for a lot of therapists. And Right now, I want to bring on October. She wants to close us out with a quick little demonstration.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Angela. I am going to share my screen right now. Um, and give me just 1 second. B, can I get you to close out your screen for me?
Sure. Let me just figure out how to do that. Do I hit remove?
Yes, so just click on that little computer down at the bottom, and then just it should say stop share. Is that? Do you see that?
Let me hit remove.
To me,
So
I'm
where?
gonna try that. Yeah, remove is great. Let's see if that. Yep, perfect. You got it. That's great. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen for just a second. I just want to give you a quick demo of ICANotes. I want to be really cognizant of everybody's time because I know you're very busy and this was about self-care. So you need to take that time back for yourself. But right now I am going to be sharing ICANotes. And so this is the ICANotes dashboard. This is ICANotes Plus. This is our program that is going to be the little elf that writes your notes. And it's a note writer. It is a full EMR system though, meaning we help with practice management. You can schedule appointments on your calendar. Your patients and clients can online schedule with you, and you can bill as well online. So that's really, really helpful. So go ahead and get those bills and payments in as well. Also, some really wonderful things. I'll just pop into the chart room here. I'll go to Sarah Smith's chart. One of the things is getting those um, legal documents like your informed consent, the good faith estimate, all of those things out and signed. And one of the things with ICANotes Plus is you can go into your communications. I can easily activate the person's portal access. I can go ahead and activate that. And then I am able to send out lots of forms and assessments. So I can also send out packets. If I have just an intake packet, I can go ahead and send that. We have assessments built in the system. So all of the well-known assessments are built in there. So I can have my GAD-7, my PHQ-9, my Zung, all of those, even a cage, and I can send those out. And whenever, and it's just that easy, it's just a click of a button, whenever your client goes into their portal and fills out those forms, it will give you a notification, and those forms come right back into the system. So you don't have to touch or try to shuffle with all that paper. So really, really nice way of getting things signed, getting appointments scheduled, and getting your money. But here is one of our probably well-known features, or most well-known features about ICANotes is our notes. So I can go into a SOAP note. We also have progress notes. I can go in and say, symptoms reported. Maybe they're dealing with anxiety, and I could say that, they're very anxious. They have panic at times. Their heart races. And then I can even say sometimes they experience sweating and shortness of breath and maybe even nausea. And then I can talk about depression and say they're having crying spells and they're having hopelessness and helplessness and irritability at times. I can talk about current stressors. Maybe they're dealing with problems with work. There's personality conflicts going on there, and they're having maybe a loss of a job is possible. They're really worried about that. Then I can talk about objective information, symptoms I've observed. I can put in here. I'm able to take anything out. So it's just kind of like a Word document. I can also put in behavior, and I can say maybe their self-care has been really reduced and their social behavior has been completely isolated, and they're having those anger issues, and that's kind of poorly controlled, along with their impulses are poorly controlled, and their functioning at work is impaired. Maybe substance use is more than advised. I can move on to my assessment. I can move into my mental status exam, and I can go through and I can say maybe their speech and language is normal and their mood is depressed. And I want to explain why. I see it in their body posture and attitude, and maybe their facial expressions and general demeanor. As you can see, the program is creating those statements for you. I can go in and say they're not psychotic, they're not suicidal, they're not homicidal. I can talk about cognition and dementia. I can talk about insight, maybe that's poor, and judgment is poor. They have anxiety and they're distracted and restless, and they have poor eye contact. And then I can talk about our plan. And we have wonderful treatment plans in here. I can link in my treatment plan and pull it directly into the note. I can even justify level of care if you're dealing with those insurance companies and you need more time, more sessions with your client. I can say that outpatient is still needed because it's interfering with their day-to-day activity and they're unable to self-alleviate. Just those statements that those utilization review specialists want to hear. And then I can go in, I can offer recommendations. We could do psychotherapy in here. I can talk about my session goals was about coping skills, and the interventions I used were perhaps support and ventilation of their feelings, and I counsel them about stress reduction techniques. And then I can finish that out. I can add a diagnosis. It's very simple. You can ICD-10 by code. So if you're very familiar with those codes, you can drop that in. It's a working list there. I can also put it in by DSM-5. I can add in my service code. I can put my time spent. We even have those private notes in there if you're doing psychotherapy and you don't want that, because now with the Information Blocking Act and the Curious Act, people can request their notes, and they're not entitled to have their psychotherapy notes. So I can go ahead and enter that into private notes and compile and preview that. And then it will give me a very nice note that looks like I spent absolute hours writing. So great feature for reimbursement there. And then I can electronically sign it. And so that's what we're known for with ICANotes. And so that's just a little demo of our product. We have some information that they're going to place in the chat if you're interested in more, learning more about ICANotes and really saving your time. I went through and explained how to create this note in about 5 minutes. Once you get really fast with ICANotes and you've been using it for a while, you can create your progress notes in 2 to 3 minutes. No problem. So thank you for letting me share that with you today. And B, thank you so much for the webinar. Was really wonderful. A lot of great responses. So thank you so much for coming and joining us today and being a part of this presentation. You did an amazing job, and I think everyone will echo that as well. So someone said, are there worksheets built on? Yes, when ICANotes, we do have worksheets. We have lots of assessments and tools. We have safety plans built in as well. So absolutely. All righty. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. I hope you'll have a wonderful day.